I told my husband I was pregnant. He smiled. These changes everything. Something felt off. The dates didn't add up because I did something he didn't know. The worst part is that when Anthony pulled me into his arms, I almost let myself believe the lie with him. That's what still gets me. Not the cheating. Not even the pregnancy. It's the way one awful choice can start to feel normal when it grows slowly enough. By the time I told my husband I was pregnant, our marriage was already broken. Quietly, neatly, in a way nobody else could see. From the outside, we looked fine. We had a house in Madison, decent jobs, one of those marriages people call solid just because it lasts long enough to look established. Anthony sold real estate, so he always knew how to present things. I was an accountant, which meant I noticed details for a living and ignored them in my own home for way too long. It didn't start with anything dramatic. It started with his phone. Anthony used to leave it anywhere. Kitchen counter. Couch cushion. Bathroom sink. Then one day he started placing it face down. Every time. At dinner, face down. On the nightstand, face down. On the arm of the couch, face down. I noticed it the way you notice a clock ticking too loudly once the room gets quiet. I told myself it was nothing. Then he started stepping outside to take calls. The first few times, he made it sound casual. Just a client. Running late, don't wait up. Need to check on a listing. That all made sense with his job. Real estate is built on weird hours and fake urgency. I wanted to believe that was all it was. I wanted a boring explanation. I wanted to feel stupid for even noticing. Instead, I started noticing more. He started dressing better on random Tuesdays. He cared about his hair more. He changed cologne, which was weird because Anthony was not a cologne guy. Then there was this new energy around him. Not happiness exactly. More like alertness. Like he was plugged into something that wasn't me. He still kissed me goodbye in the morning. Still asked how my day was. Still brought home takeout from the Thai place I liked on Fridays. That made it worse somehow. It would have been easier if he'd been mean. Easier if he'd checked out completely. But he didn't. He just made room for someone else while still pretending I was safe where I'd always been. One Thursday night, he fell asleep on the couch with a basketball game still playing and his phone in his hand. I remember standing there looking at him and thinking, if I pick that up, I can't unknow it. Then the screen lit up on its own. I miss you already. No name. Just a number. That was it. 9 syllables and my whole body went cold. I stared at the screen until it dimmed again. Anthony shifted in his sleep and muttered something. I put the phone back exactly where it had been and went upstairs like I was holding my breath underwater. I didn't confront him. I know that probably sounds weak, but I wasn't ready to blow up my life at 11:30 on a Thursday because of one message I technically wasn't supposed to see. I told myself I needed more proof. Really, I needed time. Time to let the first shock settle into something I could function around. After that, everything changed, just not out loud. I watched him more carefully. The smile he got when he looked down at his phone. The way he started showering the second he got home on some nights. The way he turned slightly away from me in bed, not enough to be obvious, just enough that I could feel it. A few days later, I checked his messages. I'm not proud of that either, but by then it didn't feel like crossing a line. It felt like trying to understand the line he had already crossed. Her name was Michelle. Michelle James. There weren't hundreds of messages because apparently cheaters like to think moderation makes them cleaner. But there was enough. Enough to see the rhythm of it. Enough to see that this wasn't new. Inside jokes. Complaints about long days. Little check-ins. Plans. He had saved her under her real name, which almost made me laugh. Either he thought I was stupid or he thought I'd never look. One message hit harder than the rest. Wish I could have stayed longer. You looked good tonight. I stared at that one for a long time. Tonight. Not someday. Not fantasy. Not flirting. Tonight. I put the phone down and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, just listening to the shower run downstairs. I remember thinking, this is the part where normal women do something. They scream. They cry. They throw the phone. They demand answers. I did none of that. I brushed my teeth. I washed my face. I got into bed. When Anthony came upstairs, hair damp, smelling like soap and that stupid new cologne, he leaned down and kissed my forehead. You okay? He asked. And I said, yeah, just tired. That was the first lie I told him after learning the truth. I started checking more after that. Not every day. Just enough to know I wasn't imagining it. Michelle worked as a pharmacist on the west side of town. I figured that out from a message about her shift running late. There were references to a gym they both used. He called her Mish once, which irritated me more than it should have. It was intimate in a lazy way. The kind of nickname that told me this had been going on long enough to soften. The ugliest part is that Anthony didn't stop being a decent husband on paper. He still remembered my mother's birthday. He still took my car to get the oil changed when he noticed the sticker was overdue. He still sat beside me at a neighborhood barbecue and kept his hand on my knee while talking to our friends like we were the same couple we'd always been. I started to feel like I was disappearing inside my own life. I stopped crying pretty quickly, which scared me. I had one night where I locked myself in the guest bathroom and cried into a hand towel so hard my chest hurt. After that, I was mostly numb. Not calm. Not healed. Just numb. Like some part of me had decided emotion was too expensive. Leaving would have been the obvious answer, except leaving isn't one choice. It's 50 choices stacked together. Sell the house or fight over it. Split accounts. Tell family. Explain to friends. Admit to everyone that what looked stable wasn't. I wasn't financially trapped, but I was tied to the life we built, and I hated him for making me weigh dignity against disruption. Around that time, things got weird at work in a completely different way. Not bad weird. Just noticeable. Christopher Scott worked in software development 2 floors above mine. We'd said hi in the break room before, the normal office version of knowing someone's face, but nothing about them. Then one afternoon the printer near my desk jammed while I was already in a bad mood, and Christopher happened to be standing there waiting on some forms. He smiled and said, "You look like you're about to fight that machine." "I am," I said. "And I'm losing." He laughed, stepped over, and unjammed it in about 10 seconds. I thanked him. He shrugged and said, "I used to work tech support in college. This is the most useful skill I've ever kept." That should have been the entire interaction. It wasn't. After that, we kept running into each other. Coffee in the lobby. Elevator rides. A sandwich place near the office where half the building went for lunch. He was easy to talk to. That was the first dangerous thing about him. He didn't act impressed by himself. He listened. Actually listened. The kind of listening that made you realize how starved you were for it. At first, I didn't tell him anything real. I just liked the feeling of talking to someone without measuring every word. He'd ask how my day was and actually wait for the answer. If I said it had been rough, he'd ask why, not as a script, but because he wanted to know. One rainy Wednesday, we ended up at the same coffee shop after work because neither of us wanted to make the walk back to the parking garage yet. He asked if he could sit with me, and I said sure. We talked for almost an hour. Work. Music. The kind of cheap apartments we lived in before we made enough money to pretend adulthood was under control. Bad bosses. Bad dates. Dumb family drama. Nothing huge. Just enough that when I got into my car afterward, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. That scared me too. The next week, he stopped by my desk with a coffee and said, "You look like you forgot to eat lunch again." I said, "That's weirdly specific." He lifted one shoulder. "You had the exact same expression last Wednesday." That made me laugh. Really laugh. The kind I hadn't heard coming out of my own mouth in a while. So yes, that's how it started. Not with lust. Not with some dramatic attraction I couldn't control. It started because my husband was giving the warm parts of himself to someone else, and I got too used to feeling invisible. Christopher made me feel visible. I still told myself I had boundaries. I told myself I was just talking to a coworker. I told myself that needing a harmless corner of my life that didn't hurt was not the same thing as cheating. Then one evening Anthony texted that he'd be late again because of a showing that ran longer than expected, and 10 minutes later I saw a message from Michelle on his phone while he was in the shower downstairs. "Already miss you." Same wording. Different day. I set his phone down, grabbed my keys, and drove. I didn't even know where I was going at first. I just knew I couldn't sit in that house and wait for him to come home smelling like another version of himself. I ended up outside the coffee shop downtown because it stayed open later than most places, and because I knew, somehow, that if anyone asked me if I was okay, I might either tell the truth or fall apart. Christopher was there. He was standing at the counter when I walked in, like my life had turned into one of those coincidences people don't believe when they hear them later. He looked over, saw my face, and his expression changed immediately. "Jennifer." I tried to say something casual. It came out thin and strange. "Hey." He stepped closer. "You okay?" And that was the moment I realized I was not okay at all. I should have lied. I should have smiled and said I was tired or stressed or buried in month-end reports. Something clean. Something respectable. Instead, I stood there with rainwater dripping off my coat and this awful pressure in my chest, and when Christopher asked again if I was okay, I said, "No. Not really." He didn't push. He just bought me a coffee without asking what I wanted because apparently by then he knew, and he sat with me in a booth near the window while I stared at the cup between my hands like it might say something useful. For a while I said nothing. Then I said, "Have you ever had that feeling where something is wrong and you almost wish you didn't know for sure?" Christopher looked at me for a second. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I have." That was enough. Not because it solved anything, but because it didn't feel performative. He didn't rush to fix me. He didn't tell me I deserved better like he was reading from a greeting card. He just made space. So I told him a version of the truth. I said my marriage was strained. I said I'd found out some things I couldn't unsee. I said I didn't know what I was doing yet. I didn't mention Michelle's name. I didn't mention reading Anthony's messages. I just sat there and admitted that I was lonelier than I had ever expected to feel while still living with another person. Christopher listened the whole time. When I finally stopped talking, he said, "You don't have to decide your whole life tonight." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. After that, we slipped into something that still had enough innocence to be deniable. Coffee after work. Longer conversations in the garage before getting into our separate cars. Texts that started about office nonsense and ended with him asking if I got home okay. If I'm being honest, I knew exactly why it felt good. Christopher saw me as someone still worth turning toward. At home, every kindness from Anthony felt poisoned. Even when he was being gentle, there was always this second life standing just behind him. I didn't tell Christopher that my husband was still actively cheating. I also didn't tell Anthony there was suddenly someone in my life whose messages I waited for. That's how things get ugly. Not with one dramatic leap. With these tiny permissions you grant yourself, because they feel smaller than the hurt you're already carrying. The first time Christopher touched me, it was barely anything. We were walking back to the parking garage after work, and I was talking too fast about a client audit and a contractor issue with the house and some random thing my mother had said on the phone, and I finally stopped and laughed at myself. I sound insane. He smiled. You sound tired. Then he put his hand lightly at the middle of my back while opening the garage door. That was it. But I felt it all the way down to my stomach. I went home and Anthony was in the kitchen chopping vegetables like we were one of those couples in a home goods ad. He looked up and said, "You're late." Stopped for coffee. He nodded and went back to cooking. And I remember standing there staring at the back of his neck and thinking, if you get to have a secret life, why am I still acting like I owe this marriage purity? That thought scared me because it sounded less like heartbreak and more like permission. A week later, Christopher kissed me. We were sitting in his car in the office parking lot after everyone else had mostly left. I had been talking about nothing, absolutely nothing, because I was nervous and trying not to be aware of the way the air felt inside that small space. Then I stopped mid-sentence and said I should go. He nodded once, but neither of us moved. Then he said, "Tell me to stop if this is a bad idea." I looked at him and knew it was a bad idea. I also knew I was tired of being the only person in my marriage expected to stay untouched by damage. So I didn't tell him to stop. The kiss was soft at first. Careful. Like he was waiting for me to pull back. I didn't. When I got home that night, I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 full minutes, with both hands gripping the steering wheel. I kept thinking, well, I guess I'm this person now. I wish I could say I felt overwhelming guilt. What I actually felt was relief, and that's much harder to admit. Not because Christopher fixed anything. He didn't. But for the first time in months, the scales didn't feel so violently uneven. Anthony was not the only one holding something outside the marriage anymore. It was twisted. Petty even. I knew that. But it also felt strangely stabilizing. Christopher and I slept together for the first time about 3 weeks later. It happened because Anthony texted me at 6:30 that he was meeting clients and would be home late, and I no longer believed anything that man typed with his thumbs. Christopher had asked if I wanted to grab dinner after work. I said yes, already knowing I should have said no. Dinner turned into drinks because neither of us wanted to end the night yet. Drinks turned into sitting too close in a dark corner booth where every pause felt loaded. He asked if I wanted to come back to his apartment, and I just looked at him for a second, long enough for him to say, "You don't have to." I went anyway. I won't turn it into some epic love story because it wasn't that. It was intimate and messy and sad in a way that would probably sound pathetic if I said it out loud. I remember lying there afterwards staring at his ceiling fan and feeling this weird combination of calm and disgust. Christopher rolled onto one elbow and said softly, "Talk to me." And I laughed once, bitter and quiet. There's not a version of this where I sound good. He studied my face for a second. "I'm not asking you to sound good." That was probably the kindest thing anyone said to me during that period of my life. It didn't become some huge affair. We didn't start sneaking off every other day. There were no dramatic hotel rooms or reckless public scenes. It happened a few more times over the next couple of months. Enough to become real. Enough that his toothbrush appeared in a cup near his sink, and I noticed it like that meant something. Enough that when my phone lit up with his name, my body reacted before my mind did. At home, Anthony was still Anthony. Sometimes distracted. Sometimes attentive. Always split in a way that made me feel insane because if I only described the good pieces, he'd sound like a decent man. That's the thing people don't talk about enough. Betrayal is harder to explain when the person doing it still remembers how you take your coffee. Then I got pregnant. It was a Tuesday morning. Nothing cinematic. No music. No warning. Just me in our bathroom before work, half awake, looking down at a test I only bought because my period was late enough to annoy me. 2 lines. I stared at them until my vision went fuzzy. My first thought was not happiness. It was math. Then panic. Because the truth was immediate and simple and horrible. There was a real chance the baby wasn't Anthony's. Christopher and I had not been reckless exactly, but we had not been careful enough to eliminate doubt either. Anthony and I were still sleeping together too, though less often, and usually with this strange politeness that made me feel even lonelier. The timeline was blurred enough that certainty vanished the second those two pink lines appeared. I sat on the bathroom floor in my robe, back against the vanity, and tried to count backward in my head like numbers could save me. They couldn't. I went to work anyway because what else was I supposed to do? Just stay home and scream at the walls? I made it to 10:30 before locking myself in a single-stall restroom and crying as quietly as possible. That night, Anthony came home with takeout and a stupidly cheerful story about some couple bidding over the same property, and I sat across from him wondering if he had any idea how close everything was to caving in. I thought about telling him. Not the whole truth, maybe, but enough. Enough to stop the lie before it got bigger. I even rehearsed it in my head while brushing my teeth. Anthony, I'm pregnant, but I need to be honest with you. Anthony, things are worse than you think. Anthony, there's a chance this baby isn't yours. Every version ended the same way. Shock. Rage. Collapse. Lawyers. The house. Our families. Public humiliation. And underneath all of that was this mean little thought I hated having. He had already lied to me first. He had already dragged another woman into our marriage without my consent. He had already decided the truth was negotiable as long as he could keep the life he liked. So when I finally told him I was pregnant, I didn't tell him anything else. I waited until after dinner. He was rinsing a plate at the sink. I said his name and he turned around, distracted, casual, expecting nothing. I'm pregnant. That was all. For a second, he just blinked at me. Then his whole face changed. Not confusion. Joy. Real joy, immediate and almost boyish. What? He said. I nodded once because suddenly I couldn't trust my voice. He laughed the stunned, breathless laugh and came toward me so fast I barely had time to set down my water glass before he wrapped his arms around me. Jennifer, he said into my hair. We're going to be parents. And I let him believe it. That moment is still lodged in me like glass because he sounded so happy. Not fake happy. Not performative. Purely, stupidly happy. The kind of happiness that makes you hate yourself if you're the one poisoning it. After that, he changed. The late nights dropped off almost immediately. Not all at once, but enough that I noticed. He came home earlier. He asked how I was feeling every day. He started going with me to appointments. He downloaded one of those pregnancy apps and started telling me weird fruit comparisons. He stood in the future nursery with paint samples and said things like, maybe a soft green, as if we were simple people with a simple story. I don't know if things with Michelle ended or if he just got better at hiding them. I never checked again after the pregnancy. I couldn't do both. I couldn't monitor his betrayal and carry my own at the same time without losing my mind. Christopher noticed the change in me before I told him why. We met after work at the coffee shop and he said, you seem far away. I looked at him for a long time and then said, I'm pregnant. He went very still. I'll give him credit for this. He didn't make it about himself right away. He asked if I was okay. He asked if I wanted water. He asked if I'd been to a doctor yet. Only after all that did he finally say, very carefully, do you know if it's mine? I said no. That one word seemed to age both of us. He looked down at the table and nodded once. Okay. There wasn't really anything else to say. He didn't ask me to leave Anthony. He didn't beg. He didn't try to turn it into destiny. Over the next few weeks, we faded. Not because one of us made some noble declaration. Because there was no place left for whatever we had been doing. The pregnancy made everything heavier and more real. We stopped texting as much. Then almost at all. By 7 months, Anthony was fully in. He built the crib himself even though the instructions clearly annoyed him. He kept putting his hand on my stomach with this expression that was so open and hopeful it made me feel sick sometimes. He talked about names in the car. He told people at parties, I still can't believe it, with this huge grin like he'd finally arrived at the life he wanted. And some days, I wanted to tell him everything just to make it stop hurting. Other days, I would remember those messages from Michelle. The easy tenderness he had given someone else while still climbing into bed next to me. The way he made me carry the loneliness first. Then I would think maybe this was just the mess we both made, only now it had grown large enough to fill a nursery. From the outside, we probably looked happy. That's the most disturbing part. How often happiness is just good staging. Inside, I felt like I was waiting for the baby to come out already carrying the truth on her face. Maybe the baby would look like Anthony and I'd spend years pretending the fear never happened. Maybe the baby wouldn't, and the whole fragile structure would collapse in one hospital room. I haven't told my friends. I haven't told my family. Nobody knows about Christopher. Nobody knows about Michelle, except me and Anthony and probably whatever version of himself he turned into around her. To everybody else, this is just a married couple in Madison getting ready for their first child. There are moments now when Anthony looks at me like I'm still the center of his world, and I honestly don't know which feeling is worse. The guilt or the anger. Because part of me does feel guilty. Deeply. I am not innocent in this. I crossed lines. I lied. I built silence on top of silence until I could barely see where one betrayal ended and the next began. But part of me also feels this cold, ugly thing I can't dress up into anything kinder. He does not get to be the only wounded person in this story. He lost the right to clean truth when he chose secret truth for himself. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it makes me practical. Maybe it makes me exactly as broken as this marriage already was. All I know is that every night I lie beside him and listen to him talk about paint colors and strollers and whether the baby will have my eyes, and I still haven't decided if I'm protecting what's left of my future or just postponing the moment it all finally cracks. And the truth is, I'm not even sure those are different things.